Ignored at the market, the widow traded a cloth for hope. Only a silent Apache man listened to her, and when night fell, he left much more than firewood. In silence, respect was born. Subscribe to the channel and discover how someone who was rejected came to be honored by an entire clan. Rain fell gently on Ribeirão das Flores when Dona Jurema arrived at the village market, her shoulders bent under the weight of years and hardship. Between her wrinkled and trembling hands, she carried her last treasure, a hand-embroidered tablecloth inherited from her late mother, decorated with motifs of ipe trees and blue macaws that she herself had finished during the long nights of solitude. Widowed for 5 years, since Mr. Antonio had departed after a lengthy illness, Jurema lived in a small mud house on the edge of the village, where the savannah met the first houses of the settlement. The roof was giving way in several places, allowing rainwater to form puddles on the packed dirt floor. With no firewood for the stove and provisions running out, she had gathered courage to offer that family relic in exchange for the minimum needed to survive. A fair trade, she thought, as her bare feet stepped into the puddles forming between the market stalls. The market buzz diminished as she passed. Some vendors averted their gaze, others whispered. Dona Jurema, with her 73 years and body withered by a difficult life, seemed like an apparition from another time amid the colorful stalls of fruits and vegetables. "Good morning, Mr. Joaquim. I brought this embroidered tablecloth to trade for a little firewood. See these birds? Each stitch took almost an hour." Mr. Joaquim, owner of the largest grocery stall, barely looked at the fabric. "Dona Jurema, you already know I don't make that kind of deal. Money for merchandise, that's the law." She didn't give up. She went from stall to stall, hearing excuses, giggles, or malicious comments. "Here comes the old trading woman," said a voice she pretended not to hear. "Nobody wants rags from a sick person," murmured another. In recent weeks, her cough had been relentless, and many in the village said she carried some contagious illness. Jurema had no strength to deny it. She just kept moving forward, the embroidered fabric now damp from the persistent drizzle. She was about to return home empty-handed when she noticed a simple stall at the end of the market, almost hidden under a large mango tree. A tall man with marked features and skin the color of packed earth was organizing herbs, roots, and savanna fruits into small, orderly piles. He wore a simple raw cotton shirt and faded pants, but what drew attention were the colored seed necklaces and the braided straw band adorning his head. It was Raoni, a man of the Karajar ethnicity who had recently begun frequenting the market. The residents kept their distance, always leaving an empty space around his stall. With her heart beating fast from exhaustion and the expectation of yet another rejection, Jurema approached. "Good morning, sir. I have this embroidered tablecloth. I'd like to trade it for a little firewood, if possible." Raoni raised his deep black eyes. He showed neither haste nor disdain. With firm, calloused hands, he took the fabric and examined it meticulously, running his fingers over the colorful embroidery, feeling each stitch, each texture. His face remained impassive, but his eyes softened. Without saying a word, he nodded with a head movement. From behind the stall, he brought a bundle of dry, well-cut firewood, larger than Jurema had expected. "It's too much," she stammered. "The tablecloth isn't worth that much." Raoni simply shook his head and placed the bundle in her arms, also returning the embroidered tablecloth. Confused, Jurema tried to protest, but he had already returned his attention to organizing the herbs. Some vendors observed the scene with expressions between curiosity and contempt. Jurema, feeling the weight of the firewood and of incomprehension, slowly moved away, her heart divided between gratitude and shame. Her house was on the opposite end of the village, where the grass grew tall and houses were distant from each other. The path was long, and the fine rain made the mud slippery. Several times she had to stop to rest, feeling her legs weaken and her breathing become difficult. The world seemed to spin around her. When she finally caught sight of her house, her heart tightened. The bamboo fence had fallen in several places, the roof showed increasingly larger holes, and the door hung from a single rusty hinge. It was little more than a shelter, but it was all she had left. She entered, left the firewood near the clay stove, and sat in the only chair that still remained firm. The silence was broken only by the sound of rain on the roof and the drops that found their way into the house. She passed her hands over her face, feeling the tears mix with the moisture from the rain. As evening fell, Jurema prepared an herbal tea she had collected from the yard days before. The firewood caught fire with difficulty because of the moisture, but finally the heat began to drive away the cold that had settled in her bones. That was when she heard a noise in the yard. She thought it might be an animal, perhaps a dog seeking shelter from the rain. But the sounds continued, stronger and rhythmic. Someone was working out there. With difficulty, she got up and went to the door. In the darkening day, Raoni's silhouette stood out against the grey sky. He was piling more firewood near the entrance, much more than Jurema could ever carry. Next to it was a small burlap sack with what appeared to be roots, fruits and dried meat, wrapped in banana leaves. He noticed her presence but didn't interrupt his work. He just looked briefly in her direction and made a gesture with his head as if to say, "It's all right." Jurema felt a lump in her throat. How long had it been since anyone had shown her a gesture of kindness? Since Antonio's departure, the village seemed to have forgotten her, as if her husband's absence had made her invisible. And now this man, this stranger who didn't even speak her language fluently, brought more than firewood. He brought dignity. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the noise of the rain. "Thank you very much." Raoni finished his work, placed the last firewood in the makeshift shelter he had made, and before leaving, looked at the roof of the house. He made a gesture indicating he would return, and without further words disappeared into the growing darkness, leaving behind only his footprints marked in the mud. The next morning, Jurema awoke to the sound of hammering. Her aching body protested when she rose from the mat where she slept, but curiosity drove her. Through the crack in the window covered with a piece of cloth, she saw Raoni on the roof of her house. He wore the same simple clothes as the day before, but now carried a bag of improvised tools tied to his waist. He worked with precise movements, replacing broken tiles, closing the holes where rain entered, without asking permission, without announcing his presence, simply fulfilling an unspoken promise. The sound of hammering soon attracted the attention of neighbors. First came Donna Zulmira, the official gossip of the village, who stopped on the dirt road pretending to admire the wildflowers while spying on the unusual scene. Soon after, Mr. Juvenal, the store owner, passed by, looking with suspicion and quickening his pace. Before noon, half of Ribeirão das Flores already knew that old Jurema's house was being repaired by the Indian. In the village of fewer than 500 inhabitants, where time seemed to run slower than the stream that gave it its name, any novelty became a topic for weeks. Jurema felt the weight of the stairs, but chose to ignore them. She gathered courage and went out to the yard carrying a cup of strong coffee she had prepared. "Would you like some coffee?" she called, raising the cup. Raoni came down from the roof with surprising agility for someone of his stature. He must have been about 40, with straight black hair that reached his shoulders, an angular face marked by the sun. His eyes, however, had a softness that contrasted with the hardness of his features. He accepted the cup with a gesture of thanks and drank the coffee in small sips, observing the work that still needed to be done. "You don't have to do this," Jurema said, breaking the silence. "You've already been very kind with the firewood and food." Raoni looked at her for a long time before answering, choosing his words carefully. "My people," he began with a heavy accent, "teach respect for elders. Wisdom comes from them." He pointed to the roof. "House protects wisdom, needs to be strong." It was more than he had spoken the day before, and Jurema felt a wave of emotion. It wasn't just charity he was offering. It was recognition, it was value, something the village had forgotten to give her. "My name is Jurema," she introduced herself, realizing they hadn't been formally introduced. "Raoni," he responded, lightly touching his own chest. "Carajá people, Araguaia River." At that moment, a stone hit the ground near them. Raoni turned quickly, instinctively positioning himself between Jurema and the direction from which the projectile came. On the road, 3 teenagers were laughing and pointing. "Look there! The old woman got herself a wild protector," shouted one of them, making the others laugh even louder. "Be careful, Grandma, he'll steal your teeth to make a necklace," mocked another. Raoni remained impassive, his face a mask of dignity, but Jurema saw his fists clench at his sides. "Don't mind them," she said softly. "They're just ignorant boys repeating what they hear at home." The indigenous man nodded slightly, returning to work without showing any reaction to the provocations that continued until the young men grew tired and went on their way. During the following days, Raoni always appeared at dusk. He never announced his arrival, simply appeared as a natural extension of the landscape. With each visit, he brought some improvement to Jurema's house. He reinforced the fallen fence, fixed the wood stove that was smoking, brought medicinal herbs for her persistent cough. He worked in silence, communicating more through gestures than words. Jurema began to wait for him, preparing stronger coffee or setting aside some fruits she managed to pick in the yard. Gradually, a language of their own was established between them, made of half words, glances, and hands, that moved to explain what the voice couldn't reach. Raoni's visits didn't go unnoticed in Ribeirão das Flores. The buzz grew, fueled by speculation and prejudice. The old woman must be paying the Indians somehow, some insinuated. He must have his eye on her land, others suspected. Some older women made the sign of the cross when the subject arose, as if friendship between an elderly Brazilian woman and an indigenous man was some kind of heresy. One morning, Father Tomás, a young parish priest recently arrived in town, knocked on Jurema's door. Tall, thin, with round glasses and a genuine smile, he was one of the few people in the village who treated everyone with equal respect. "Dona Jurema, I came to see how you're doing," he said, agreeing to enter the simple but now considerably tidier house. "People are talking, you know how it is." Jurema served a glass of fresh water, taken from the clay filter Raoni had repaired the week before. "Let them talk, Father. When you reach my age, other people's words weigh less than a hummingbird's feather." The priest smiled, adjusting his glasses. "You're right. I just came to say not to listen to the malice. And also," he hesitated for a moment, "to meet your friend. I heard he knows a lot about medicinal plants." The priest's genuine interest surprised Jurema. "He should come today at dusk, as always. You could come back, if you'd like." That afternoon, when Raoni appeared carrying a bundle of bamboo to reinforce the back wall of the house, he found not only Jurema, but also the young priest. The initial distrust in the indigenous man's eyes dissipated when Father Tomás, instead of sermons or invasive questions, showed sincere interest in the medicinal plants he carried. "This one here," explained Raoni, showing a knotty root, "good for cough. Boil with jatai bee honey." The priest noted everything in a small notebook, fascinated. "In medical school they don't teach us about these traditional knowledge," he commented. "It's a pity." The priest's visit changed something subtle in the village's dynamics. If the church representative saw no problem in the friendship between Jurema and Raoni, perhaps there was no reason for so much distrust. There were still crooked looks and malicious comments, but some residents began to timidly wave when Raoni passed by. Others, more courageous, approached at the market to ask about plants for joint pain or digestive problems. Jurema observed this gradual change with a mixture of relief and distrust. She knew human nature too well to believe in quick transformations. The proof came on a Sunday afternoon, when she finally felt strong enough to go to Mass after months of absence. She wore her only good dress, a faded blue one she kept for special occasions, and walked slowly to the small church in the center of the village. She sat in the last pew, as she always had, hoping to go unnoticed. But as soon as she entered, she noticed the looks and whispers. During communion, when she rose to receive the host, she clearly heard the voice of Dona Eunice, the mayor's wife. Now, the friend of the Indians also wants to take communion like decent people. The comment provoked contained chuckles. Jurema felt her face burn, but kept her head high. That night, when Raoni arrived, he found her sitting on the newly built porch, looking at the horizon with teary eyes. Without asking why, he sat beside her on the rustic bench. They remained like that for some time, just existing side by side in the comforting silence they had cultivated. "My people," Raoni finally spoke, "also know contempt. Words hurt more than stones sometimes." Jurema nodded, discreetly wiping away a tear. "Why do you help me, Mr. Raoni? I gave you nothing but that old embroidered tablecloth." He looked at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "I saw your eyes," he answered simply. "They had same light as my grandmother. She taught me to see beyond skin, beyond words." In that instant, something indefinable changed between them, an understanding that transcended languages, cultures, and prejudices. The news came like thunder on a clear day. The municipality of Ribeirão das Flores was planning to expand the urban area, and the lands on the edge of the village, including the plot where Jurema's house stood, would be expropriated for the construction of a new housing development. Father Tomás was the one who brought the information, on a rainy afternoon that heralded the beginning of winter in the savannah. They're giving only 30 days for all residents of the area to vacate. They say they'll pay compensation, but from what I heard in the meetings, it will be a paltry amount, explained the priest, accepting the cup of tea Jurema offered him. And the worst is that they're using a legal loophole about irregular occupations, since many don't have complete documentation of the lands. Jurema felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. That piece of land, that simple house, was all that remained after a lifetime of work. Mr. Antonio had bought the plot decades ago, but the papers were lost when the registry office caught fire 15 years earlier. They had only a receipt yellowed by time, which they didn't even know if it still had any legal value. "What can I do, Father?" Her voice came out weaker than she intended. The young priest adjusted his glasses, visibly uncomfortable. "I'll be honest, Donna Jurema. Legally, it's a difficult battle, but I'm organizing a committee of residents to talk to the mayor. If we show that there are families established for generations on those lands, perhaps we can get more time or better conditions." When Raoni arrived that night, he found Jurema rummaging through an old wooden box, full of yellowed papers and faded photographs. She raised her eyes, red from crying, and told him about the threat of eviction. The indigenous man's face remained impassive, but his eyes darkened like the sky before a storm. "Land always been problem," he said, sitting beside her on the packed dirt floor. "My people know this for many sons." He remained silent for a few minutes, as if pondering something important. Then, with sudden decision, he stood up. "Tomorrow I need to go. We'll return in 3 days." He left before Jurema could ask any questions, leaving her confused and apprehensive. In the following 3 days, the house seemed emptier and more silent than ever. Jurema continued her daily routine, feeding the chickens, watering the small vegetable garden Raoni had helped her plant, sweeping the yard. But each activity seemed permeated by a deep melancholy. The idea of losing that place made her heart tighten, as if invisible hands were crushing it. Father Tomas appeared on the afternoon of the second day, bringing news about the meeting with the mayor. "It was as we expected, Donna Jurema. He said the decision is made, that it's for the progress of the city. He only offered the possibility of extending the deadline to 45 days, instead of the initial 30. The idea of having 15 more days of agony didn't seem like a great consolation." Jurema thanked the priest for his efforts and accompanied him to the gate. In the distance, on the dirt road that led to the city, she saw Mr. Olavo, the mailman, approaching on his faded blue bicycle. "Donna Jurema," he called, still at a distance. "I have a letter for you. Rare thing nowadays, huh?" He handed over a simple envelope without a return address. Inside, there was only a handwritten note, in large and somewhat awkward letters. "Wait tomorrow at sunset. Raoni." The third day dragged on as if it had twice the normal hours. Jurema cleaned the house, even knowing she might have to leave it soon. She separated some old clothes for donation, found the embroidered tablecloth she had tried to trade with Raoni, and washed it carefully, hanging it in the sun to dry. Whatever happened, she wanted to be prepared. When the sun began to descend on the horizon, spilling orange colors on the sparse clouds, Jurema sat on the porch to wait. As the light diminished, she began to hear a distant sound, drums, voices singing in a language she didn't understand. The sound grew stronger, and soon she could see torches lighting up at the curve of the road, illuminating a procession that approached slowly. Her heart accelerated. At the front of the procession came Raoni, dressed in traditional garments of his culture, a loincloth of braided straw, his bare chest covered with seed and animal teeth necklaces, his face painted with red and black lines. Behind him, at least 20 people, men, women, and children, also in ceremonial attire, carrying torches, drums, and other instruments that Jurema had never seen before. They were people of the Carajá ethnicity, coming from the village on the banks of the Araguaia River, almost 50 kilometers away. The procession stopped in front of Jurema's house. Raoni stepped forward, accompanied by a much older man, whose face, wrinkled like the bark of an ancient jatoba tree, carried the dignity and wisdom of many decades. It was Ibirajara, the shaman of the village. Beside them, a young woman carried a child of approximately 2 years, who observed everything with curious eyes. "Jurema," said Raoni, speaking in clear Portuguese so that everyone would understand, "I brought my people to meet you." The old shaman stepped forward, examining Jurema with eyes that seemed to see beyond flesh. He spoke some words in the Karajar language, which Raoni translated. He says your eyes are like clear water where one can see the bottom of the river. Says your house has good spirit, that welcomes without asking where we come from. Ibirajara made a gesture, and two young men stepped forward, carrying a long object wrapped in fabric. They unwrapped it, revealing a carved wooden totem, with figures resembling wolves, birds, and fish intertwined in complex forms. Under the shaman's orders, the young men planted the totem in the center of Jurema's yard. This is symbol of Heron clan, explained Raoni. When it is placed in a place, it means that place is under protection of Karajar people. Jurema felt her legs weaken. The drums began to sound again, and the indigenous community started dancing in circles around the newly planted totem. Their voices rose in ancestral chants that echoed through the night, attracting the attention of the closest neighbors who came out of their houses to observe the unusual spectacle. Some maintained a respectful distance, others approached timidly, attracted by the music and dances. Among the curious was Father Tomas, who observed everything with a mixture of fascination and respect. At his side, to Jurema's surprise, was Mayor Eugenio, a corpulent middle-aged man whose normally arrogant face now showed an expression of confusion and perhaps a little apprehension. When the dance ended, Ibirajara made a broad gesture and spoke in a loud voice. Raoni translated, "From this moment, this woman and this land are part of the Karajar people, not by blood, but by choice of the Heron spirit. Whoever disrespects her peace disrespects our entire nation." The shaman then approached Jurema and placed around her neck a necklace of red and white beads with a small amulet of carved wood in the shape of a heron. "To protect," he said in surprisingly clear Portuguese for someone who supposedly didn't speak the language. The ceremony continued into the night. The Karajar women brought food, smoked fish, roasted cassava, savanna fruits, and shared with all present, including local residents who had approached. Indigenous children played with some village children, teaching them traditional games. Young warriors demonstrated hunting techniques with bow and arrow, impressing the teenagers of Ribeirão das Flores. It was as if an invisible barrier was being torn down, brick by brick. In the midst of the celebration, Raoni led Jurema to where Mayor Eugenio was talking with Father Tomas. The politician seemed uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Mr. Mayor," said Raoni with a formality that surprised Jurema, "need to talk about Dona Jurema's land." The mayor cleared his throat, adjusting his tie as if it had suddenly become too tight. "Look, I understand that you have your traditions, but there are laws, you see? Urban development projects that were approved by the city council." Raoni maintained his gaze fixed on the politician's eyes. "We know laws too. Federal law protects places of cultural value for indigenous peoples. This place," he pointed to the totem and to Jurema's house, "now is sacred place for Karajar people. We have lawyers at Funai who can explain better if needed." The mention of the National Indian Foundation made the mayor's forced smile falter. Father Tomas, perceiving the tension, intervened. "Perhaps we can find a solution that respects both the city's development and cultural traditions. Isn't that right, Mr. Mayor? After all, Ribeirão das Flores has always prided itself on its diversity." The politician looked around, noting how local residents and the Karajar were beginning to mix in the celebration. Several people were observing the conversation, waiting to see what his reaction would be. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he nodded. "We'll reconsider the layout of the development. Perhaps we can preserve this specific area as a cultural center or something like that." When the mayor walked away, Father Tomas smiled at Raoni and Jurema. He knows that facing Funai and public opinion would be a political nightmare. "You've gained time, and time is what we need to find a permanent solution." Jurema, still stunned by the events of the night, looked at Raoni with admiration and gratitude. "How did you manage to bring your entire village here?" The indigenous man smiled, for the first time since Jurema had met him. "Spoke with tribal council. Told about wise woman who respects land and traditions, who was rejected by her own people as many of us were. Council decided you are sister, even without same blood." That night, under the starry sky of the Brazilian savannah, something greater than a simple friendship was celebrated. It was a bridge between worlds that for a long time had remained with their backs to each other. Now united by mutual respect and the recognition of dignity, that transcended cultural differences. The days that followed the Karajar ceremony brought changes that Jurema could never have imagined. The news about the totem and the symbolic adoption of the elderly woman by the indigenous tribe spread quickly, first through the village, then to neighboring municipalities, until it reached the newspapers in the capital. Reporters appeared, interested in the story of the Brazilian lady who had become an honorary sister of the Karajar. Photographers captured the carved totem, the simple house, and Jurema's wrinkled face, now adorned with traditional paintings that the women of the tribe had taught her to make. At first, all this attention frightened her. For decades, she had been practically invisible, and suddenly everyone wanted to hear her story. But Raoni was always nearby, like a silent and comforting presence, filtering out insistent journalists and invasive curiosity seekers. The municipality, pressured by public opinion and by indigenous rights organizations that became aware of the case, officially retreated from the expropriation plan. It went further. It announced the creation of a cultural preservation project for the area, which would be developed together with Karajar representatives. Jurema could remain in her house for as long as she wished, and the land would later be transformed into a center for memory and traditions. "It's an important precedent," explained Carolina, the young Funai lawyer who came to advise the community. "We are using this case to strengthen the protection of territories with cultural significance for indigenous peoples, even when they are outside official demarcations." But the most significant transformation was not legal or political. It was the one that occurred within the community of Ribeirão das Flores itself. The Karajar women, who initially came only for the ceremony, began to visit Jurema regularly, bringing children, stories, and ancestral knowledge. They taught her to weave with buriti palm straw, to make medicines with savanna plants, to paint ceramics with traditional patterns. In exchange, she shared embroidery techniques, old recipes passed down by her grandmother, stories from the times when the village was no more than half a dozen houses around a chapel. The children from the village loved to hear her stories, sitting in a circle in the yard while she, with a measured voice and broad gestures, told Brazilian legends about the Sachi, the Iara, the Curupira. Jurema, who never had children of her own, found herself surrounded by an extended and noisy family, united not by blood, but by affection and mutual respect. Gradually, the local residents, seeing the naturalness of that coexistence, began to approach as well. Donna Zulmira, the same one who used to spread malicious gossip, appeared one day with a still warm cornmeal cake, apologizing for not having been a good Christian. Mr. Juvenal from the store began to send supplies regularly. Even the teenagers who had thrown stones stopped to help when they saw Raoni building a new chicken coop. The invisible barrier that had for so long separated the city people from the village people began to dissolve, replaced by a genuine curiosity and growing respect. One day, the chief of the Karajar Tribal Council, an imposing man named Piata, came personally to visit Jurema. He brought with him his 5-year-old granddaughter Iande, a vibrant child with curious eyes and an easy smile. "My granddaughter asked to meet the story grandma," he explained through Raoni. "Everyone in the village talks about your stories of talking animals and enchanted forests." Jurema felt her heart warm. She prepared a simple snack, cassava cake, coffee with milk for the adults, cashew juice for the girl, and they all sat on the porch. Hyande, initially shy, soon loosened up when Jurema began telling the story of the tortoise that won a race against the deer. The girl laughed, asked questions, wanted to know details about each animal mentioned. When the story ended, she ran to the elderly woman's lap as if she had known her for years. "She likes you," observed Pieta with a smile. "Children know how to recognize good heart." Before leaving, the tribal chief made a formal invitation. He wanted Jurema to visit the village for the next harvest ritual, an important ceremony that would take place in 2 weeks. "Would be honor to have our Karajar sister present," he said. Jurema accepted, moved. In the following days, she prepared for the visit as if it were a big event. She washed and ironed her best dress, set aside simple gifts for the village children, small wooden toys that Mr. Antonio had made years ago, stories written in school notebooks with her careful handwriting, homemade sweets wrapped in colored paper. When the day arrived, Raoni came to get her in an old pickup truck borrowed from a friend. The journey to the village, located in a reserve on the banks of the Araguaia River, took almost 2 hours on bumpy dirt roads. But each jolt was worth it when Jurema finally caught sight of the set of traditional huts arranged in a semicircle, with the majestic river in the background reflecting the afternoon sun. The reception was warm. Women and children came to meet her, touching her gently, admiring the bead necklace the shaman had given her. Yande ran to hug her legs, pulling her by the hand to show her the village. Throughout the day, Jurema was treated as a guest of honor. They showed her how they made cassava flour, how they wove hammocks with natural fibers, how they prepared paints for body painting from fruits and roots. At night, when the main ceremony began, she was led to a special place near the central fire. The Atin spoke at length in Karaja, and although Jurema didn't understand the words, she felt their importance from the solemn tone and from the attentive faces that surrounded him. Raoni translated occasionally. They spoke of connection with the land, of respect for ancestors, of gratitude for the harvested fruits, of union between different peoples, but equally children of the same earth. At one point, Ibirajara, the old shaman, rose with difficulty and walked to where Jurema was sitting. He carried in his hands an object carefully wrapped in leaves. When he unwrapped it, he revealed a small ceramic statuette painted with traditional Karaja motifs. A female figure with white hair holding a child by the hand. The Ritsoko dolls are sacred to our people, explained Raoni. They represent our ancestors, our history. This one is special, made for you. It represents you passing stories to next generation. Jurema accepted the gift with trembling hands, unable to contain her tears. That small clay figure meant more than any official title or honor. It was the recognition of her value as guardian and transmitter of wisdom. The feast continued into the early hours, with dances, songs, and much shared food. Jurema, tired but happy, fell asleep in a hammock specially prepared for her, lulled by the distant sound of drums and the murmur of the great river. At dawn, when she was preparing to return home, she was surprised by a procession of children led by Iande. Each brought a small gift, a colored feather, a rare seed, a sweet fruit, a drawing made in the sand and then carefully transferred to a piece of tree bark. "For you to remember us," said the girl, in hesitant Portuguese she had learned especially for the occasion. "And come back soon, tell more stories." During the journey back, Jurema remained silent, absorbing everything she had experienced. Raoni respected her withdrawal, driving calmly along the reddish dirt road that wound between hills covered with savanna vegetation. Only when they caught sight of the first houses of Ribeirão das Flores did he speak. "You made difference for my people, for children especially. They need to know there are good people outside the village." Jurema nodded, understanding the weight of those simple words. When they arrived at her house, a surprise awaited them. The yard was full of people, residents of the village, members of the Karaja community who had arrived by another path, journalists, even Mayor Eugenio with his suit out of place in the rural environment. In the center of the yard, covered by a cloth, there was something large that Jurema couldn't identify. Father Tomas stepped forward, taking her gently by the arm. "Dona Jurema, we wanted to make a surprise. After all that happened, the community decided it was time to officially recognize what you represent for all of us. A bridge between worlds, a guardian of memories." At the priest's signal, two young men, one from the village and one from the indigenous settlement, pulled the cloth, revealing a carved wooden plaque. On it, in carefully painted letters, it read, "Dona Jurema Cultural Center, space of Brazilian and Karaha memories and traditions." Below, in smaller letters, "Where stories meet and new paths begin." Jurema brought her hands to her face, unable to believe what she was seeing. Mayor Eugenio approached, visibly embarrassed but trying to appear natural. "It's official, Dona Jurema. The municipality has legally ceded this land for the creation of the cultural center. You will have your house preserved and will be the honorary director. We will have resources to build an adequate space for workshops, presentations, everything necessary to keep alive the traditions that you helped preserve." Raoni, beside her, smiled discreetly. It had been he who had articulated everything behind the scenes, along with Father Tomas and Karaha leaders, convincing the mayor that a cultural center would be much more valuable for his political image than just another generic housing development. The children from the village, led by little Iande, formed a circle around Jurema and began a traditional dance, soon joined by children from the town who imitated their movements with enthusiasm and some awkwardness. Adults from both communities talked, exchanged recipes, compared craft techniques. Where once there was fear and distrust, something new was now growing: respect, curiosity, friendship. That sunny afternoon, looking at the people gathered in her yard, people who just months before had treated her as invisible, Jurema understood that she had gained much more than a house or a title. She had found her purpose, her chosen family, her place in the world. And it had all begun with a simple gesture of dignity. A man who had seen value where others saw only an old woman with an embroidered cloth. Weeks later, when the cultural center was already beginning to take shape with the help of volunteers from both communities, Jurema found a moment to be alone with Raoni. Sitting on the porch, observing the sunset that tinged the sky orange and purple, she finally asked the question she had kept for so long. "Why did you really help me that first day at the market? You could have simply ignored an old woman like me." Raoni contemplated the horizon for a few moments before answering. "My grandmother used to say, 'Whoever does not honor the elderly does not deserve their own future.' I saw in your eyes the same strength I saw in hers. Could not let that strength fade away." They remained silent, side by side, as the sun disappeared over the horizon. They were no longer strangers from different worlds, but companions on a journey, united by something deeper than words could express: the mutual recognition of human dignity that transcends all barriers. And as the first stars began to dot the sky, in the yard in front of the house, Brazilian and Carajá children played together, learning from each other, unknowingly building a future where differences would no longer be a reason for separation, but for celebration. A future that had begun with a simple gesture of respect. If this narrative touched your heart, don't keep it just for yourself. Share it, leave your like and comment on what moved you most in Dona Jurema and Raoni's journey. Stories like this only come alive when passed on, just like the traditions they fought so hard to preserve. Your participation is what keeps the magic of storytelling alive.